Good morning. I'm glad to be here with you this morning, and those who are here attending with us physically, and those who are watching us as we're live streamed here. But anyway, I'm glad you're here today. This is another beautiful day that the Lord's made. We've had some rainfall from the skies and in some much needed places, and of course, some folks are getting more than they want. But we're thankful for what we have received. So today we're going to be continuing our study as we are walking in the steps of Jesus and trying to see through his eyes. Now, Jesus took a lot of steps. I mean, he went a lot of places and he saw a lot of people and he did a lot of things in his life. And right now we are in that portion of his life that is referred to as his early ministry or his Galilean ministry. And we're not attempting to take every moment that Jesus spent with someone. Matter of fact, we don't even have them all recorded, as you probably well know. I mean, John, the writer of the Gospel John, he made a statement towards the end of his book in reference to how many things that Jesus had done. He said if all of the healings, the miracles, and the signs and the things that Jesus had done, if they all were recorded, it would fill volumes. So we know that what we have recorded for us is just a few of the things that Jesus did and a few of the people that he healed. We have summary statements, as we saw last week, where the writer will just say, whether it's Luke or Mark or Matthew or even John himself, it's just a summary statement saying that, and Jesus did these things. He went throughout the region and he healed those who were demon possessed and those who were ill, who had different diseases. But what you and I have attempted to do is just to look at a few of those moments. And one of the reasons that we look at them is to see, what did Jesus see? How did he see people? How did he respond to people? I've suggested to you that Jesus and God the Father are most happy when we get along with one another, when we treat each other right. And so a lot of Jesus's ministry as he goes about is he sees people who are being harassed and people who are being mistreated and people who are being marginalized. And he speaks to their comfort. And he works towards relieving them of their oppression. He makes that statement, "Come to me, all of you who are burdened and heavy laden. Those of you who are suffering, come to me. Those of you who have problems, come to me." And he says, "And I will exchange your burdens. I will take on your burdens. I will pay the price of your burdens." And I'm paraphrasing what Jesus had to say, but he said, "Come to me and I will make your burden light." So as we walk in the steps of Jesus, we see then that if we get nothing else out of the Gospels or the good news that Jesus shared, is that he's bringing in a new world order, a new kingdom. And it's more about the spirit than it is about the physical. It is more about caring and compassion and treating people right than it is about building big empires and big nations and big thrones. So this morning, let's begin our study. We are in Matthew chapter 8. Most of our discussion so far, and as we go forward, will come from the Gospel of Matthew, one of the synoptic Gospels, and the Gospel of John. We'll occasionally make reference over to Luke or Mark because oftentimes they give us just a little bit more insight or a little bit different picture of a particular event. And so last week, we had brought Jesus back from Jerusalem, and through Samaria. We spent the time talking about his relationship there with the Samaritans, and particularly the Samaritan woman. But we took him back up into Galilee, and he has gone throughout the the towns and the communities of Galilee, sharing the good news, the news about the kingdom. And in the process of that, he has healed many people. We talked about that people had come from all over the area of Syria. They'd come from the east of the Jordan and west of the Jordan, east of the Sea of Galilee and west of the Sea of Galilee, and from the north and from the south. People had come because they had heard of the great miracles and the healings and the things that he had done. We talked that in chapters 5 through 7, we did not discuss those chapters a lot because it particularly deals with the Sermon on the Mount. But the thing that I think is important about the Sermon on the Mount is that Jesus, as he goes, and he has seen these people who are struggling, who are harassed, who are mistreated, who are oppressed, not only by the Romans and the Roman authority, which is occupying the land, but by their own leaders. How their own Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, and the civil leaders treated their fellow Israelite, their fellow Jew. And how a wealthy Jew sometimes mistreated a less fortunate Jew. How a master mistreated a servant. And how one beggar mistreated another beggar because he could. So Jesus, he sees those things. And so he speaks to us about relationships and how we are to treat one another. And we get the picture that we are to be servants. We are to be looking after the needs of others more than the need of our own. That we are to lift others up. It's not about how many people you can be over. It's about how many people you can lift up and serve. So last week we began reading in Matthew chapter 8. And again, this is filling out some of those summary statements where it talked about in Jesus healed diseases and he healed those who were sick and he cast out demons. So as we move through these we pick up some of these stories. Last week we talked about the Roman centurion who as Jesus came to Capernaum, this centurion, not a Jew man, not a Jewish man, not an Israelite. Most likely this man is a member of the Roman society. He is a centurion. He's an official within their army. And he's asking help for his servant. And Jesus, the thing that I think we should most pay attention to in that message is that as Jesus looked at this Roman Gentile military man, a master who was showing the right attitude towards a servant, he was concerned about his servant. He was so concerned about his servant that he himself made the trip to where Jesus was. And he spoke to Jesus. And he spoke to him in an humble way, requesting that he heal his servant. And then he goes on and tells Jesus the faith. He expresses his faith that Jesus can heal his servant. And Jesus is impressed with his faith. The various readings that we have of this story, a common thing is that Jesus turns to the other people, primarily to his disciples who are following him. And he says that he is amazed. He's not seen such a great faith even among the house of Israel. I thought that was interesting. You see, Jesus is concerned more than just the house of Israel. He demonstrated that in Samaria with the Samaritan woman and the Samaritan people. And he spent time with them. Now he responds to a Roman, a Gentile. And he marvels at his faith. And of course, he honors his request and he heals his servant. As Jesus then continued on there in the area of Galilee, he's now gone over to the Sea of Galilee. He's now there on the shore. He's going to where Peter's mother and family reside. That's where he is. So we're in chapter 8, verse 14. When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in the bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up, and she began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. Now remember, Jesus has a greater purpose. He's come here to heal the world, to save the world, to redeem the world and all who are in it and all that it is made of. That's his overall purpose. But as he goes about that business and as he's proclaiming that good news and the nearness of the kingdom and that he, the king, is here, he has compassion on people as he comes to them. He heals Peter's mother-in-law. News gets out he's in town, and people come in droves for him to heal them, and he does so. And then Matthew tells us this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took our infirmities and carried our diseases. This brings to mind for me, perhaps maybe you as well. Have you seen the movie The Green Mile? You know, it's a movie that Tom Hanks, I think, probably directed, but he certainly played a role in it, of a guard within a prison system. So Tom Hanks was this guard, but there was a man in there. He was a rather large black man, a man who was on the fringe of society, a man who had been in prison, accused of a crime he didn't commit, but people were afraid of him because he had this gift. Now, I understand this is just a story. This is fiction. But this man had the ability, when he came across a person who had a disease, he would take the disease upon himself. The scripture here says that this was to fulfill the prophecy in Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and he carried our diseases. In The Green Mile, and I cannot remember the character's name, but I can see him, a very, very large man. But as he would come to somebody and they would be deathly ill. One of them was the warden's wife. You remember they broke him out. They took him out of the prison and took him to the warden's house to cure his wife, and the warden wasn't happy with it. But as I recall the story, of course, he was very happy after he saw what happened. But as he would lay his hands on somebody, that disease, the way the movie would depict it, you would see this cloud of what looked like just microisms that would come out of the person, and he would absorb them. Jesus, he bears our suffering. He absorbs, he carries our sins, the penalty of our sins. He will take them to the cross. But I just remember seeing that and thinking, what if people could have seen something like that when Jesus healed them? What did they see? I mean, they saw demons being cast out. They saw something. What did they see? They saw a leper. Suddenly his skin is cleansed. Well, the way they would have depicted in The Green Mile, this very large black man, when he touched the leper, you would have seen leprosy go all over his body, but then it would cure away and the man would be healed. What did they see when they saw Jesus lay his hands upon someone and heal them? It's just interesting. But see, Jesus was compassionate, just as the man in The Green Mile was compassionate. He gained nothing. He was not getting out of prison. He would go to the electric chair. And Tom Hanks' character would, as you know, be the one who would have to go in there and with him as he died. And not that I want to reiterate that whole story, but I think that fiction depicts something that we can see in real life in Jesus. He bears, he carries, he absorbs our sins. He carries our diseases and our infirmities. And now, as we move forward in chapter 8, Jesus teaches about the cost of following him. In verse 18, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, now before we get into that, there are several readings about this trip across the lake. And you know the story. I mean, he will be in the boat with his apostles, and this is before he walks on water, I think. This is the time that he is in the boat with them, and the storm comes up and he's asleep. And they all are afraid. And remember, a good number of these guys are fishermen. And this says disciples. It doesn't necessarily, I don't think it just says apostles. So we don't know how many were with him. But his disciples followed along and got in the boat, and they were going across. And I think there were other people got in other boats and were going with them. I think there was more probably than one boat out there on the water. I can't really prove that, but it's just the way it reads when you read the various storylines, that there were a good number of people who were following Jesus. Well, here's a little interlude of 2 or 3 people who come to Jesus during that time that express their desire to follow him. So let's read that. So then he got into a boat, and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus, I need to back up. I meant to start my reading up here in verse 18. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, now what has he done? He's gone to Capernaum. He's healed Peter's mother. He's had people come from all over the region. He's healed them. He's cast out demons. And then it said this is to fulfill the passage, the scripture that says he will carry he took up our infirmities and he carries our diseases. So now as the people are crowding around him, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law. Now this is a very good, educated, well-respected man. He comes to Jesus. He says, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And then Jesus replies, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Another disciple come to him and said, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." I think this is just a small episode that is taking place in this message that Jesus has of follow me. I mean, when he went and saw Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, and all of them out there fishing, he comes up to the fishermen and he says, "Follow me." There will come a moment, as we will see later on, that he will run across Levi, Matthew, collecting taxes, sitting at his tax booth, and Jesus will say, "Follow me." Here, it appears that these people are responding. These people are responding to the call of Jesus to follow me. And this very learned Pharisee, or this very learned teacher of the law, comes and says, "I will follow you wherever I go." Well, Jesus kind of tells him the cost of that. Now, we'll see this story played out and told in different ways at different times, and Jesus will really lay down what the cost is of following him. Not that he's trying to discourage people, but he wants them to know that this needs to be more than lip service. Jesus says to follow me means giving up. Something to be given up. But yet there's also something to be gained. So what do you hold in high value? What do you hold in great esteem? What are you willing to give up so that you might gain this relationship that Jesus has? Well, if you're looking for a throne, you're not going to receive that. That's not what Jesus is about. Jesus is more about being a servant. caring, compassion. And then the second man, of course, comes and says, I really want to follow you. I want to be one of your disciples. But I got some family business to go take care of. Now, Jesus is really not opposed to the people burying their family, burying their dead. But he uses that as a teaching moment. And he tells the man, but Jesus says, you follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. So that's a very small picture of that story. If you go over and read it I think it's recorded both in Luke and Mark. I think if you go and read it there, you will find there's a little more verbiage in there in that story. But Jesus is expressing to people, I want you to follow me. He's calling them to follow me. He's talking about a new kingdom. He has told Nicodemus, you must come a new person, a new creation, be born again. He has told somebody else, and that's escaping me for a moment. I'll come back to that in a minute. But various times we find him telling us what the kingdom is like, and the people who enter the kingdom, what kind of nature they must have, what kind of attitude they must have. In the Beatitudes, which is part of the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about servanthood. He talks about those who are meek, not those who are being raised up. He talks about those who are bereaved and those who are persecuted, and how they will be healed and how they will be raised up. So Jesus then calls people to follow him. So I think there's a bunch of people who follow him. And now we'll get back to our reading in verse 23. Matthew chapter 8, verse 23. Then he got into the boat. He purposed to go to the other side. And he's had these people ask or proclaim their desire to follow him. He gets in his boat and his disciples followed him. Now, I know we have a tendency to think that means, well, that's just the 12. It doesn't say that. Remember, at this point in time, depending upon which text you're reading, Jesus may or may not officially have called the 12. He's still dealing with a group of much larger number than that. We will find a number of 70 and sometimes 72 mentioned as a group of disciples that follow Jesus, and he sends them out. Now, some think that 70 or that 72 is in addition to the future 12. And some people think that the 12 come from that number. And I say, yes. I'm not sure which one it is. But there is a larger group of disciples, and it may be more than 70. But we know that there's a group of 70 or 72 that gets selected to go on a particular mission. And there's a group of 12 that are chosen from a larger group of disciples. And we can see that in the various stories that we read as Jesus selects people. But right here in this story, there are people who come from all over Syria to Capernaum because Jesus is there. And they've heard that he has healed people and he's cast out demons. And now, because there are so many people there, Jesus needs some of these moments to get away. And so he says, let's go to the other side. So he's going from the west side of the Sea of Galilee at Capernaum, and he's going over to the east side, which is where the Decapolis is. That's a whole region of 10 cities that's known as the Decapolis. And he has invited people to follow him. Isn't that interesting? So then he got into his boat, and his disciples, how many, we don't know, they followed him. How many got in the boat with him? I don't know. But a few did. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. He replies this to his disciples, people that he's called to follow him, people who have a desire to follow him. And he says to them, you have little faith. Your faith is so small. Why are you afraid? I mean, after all, they are in the presence of greatness. They are in the presence of the Messiah. They don't really quite grasp that. Even if they have it here, somehow they haven't quite got a handle on who Jesus is. Lord, save us. We're going to drown. And he replies, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and he rebuked the winds and the waves, and it became completely calm. The men, that's the men that were in a boat with him, and possibly the men and women, whoever were in the other boats that might have been surrounding him, that were following him to the other side. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. You remember that summary statement we read that talked about all the miraculous things and signs that Jesus did? This is a big one. This is a big one. When he arrived, we're in verse, if I can see my number there, I think it's verse 28. When he arrived at the other side in the region of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. Now, this same story is recorded in some of the other Gospels. In this story, in this telling by Matthew, there are 2 demon-possessed people. When you go over to Luke and read this story, Luke tells it. Now, remember, there's a good chance that Matthew is with him, but maybe not. He may not have yet joined Jesus, because we're going to find in chapter 10 where Jesus gets introduced to Matthew. But Matthew is a little closer to the story because he is spending time with Jesus here in the time period that Jesus is in the area of Galilee. But when Luke tells this story, Luke is telling it as a third party. He has gained this story from somebody else. And as Luke tells his story, he mentions only one demon-possessed man here in this area of Gadarenes. So it appeared out of these 2 men, there was one demon-possessed man that made a very great impression on everybody there. And so as Luke tells the story, and maybe we'll just, if I think I have time this morning, maybe we'll read that one in a moment. But let's go ahead and finish this reading here. So as Matthew tells the story, we got 2 demon-possessed men. Now, don't you think Jesus could have avoided these demon-possessed people if he wanted to? I mean, there's times that Delaney and I thought our kids were possessed. They weren't, but, we kind of thought that every now and then. And I'm sure my parents thought the same thing about us. But see, there's no doubt here. These are demon-possessed men. As you read the story, you find out that they were dangerous. And people were afraid of them. There were people who got beaten by them. I'm sure they stole stuff from people to survive, including food and their livestock and things of that nature. Most of us would avoid the crazy person. That's what most of us would do. We would avoid them, but not Jesus. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. What do you want with us, Son of God? They shouted. Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time? Some distance from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. The demons begged Jesus, if you drive us out, send us into the herd of the pigs. Now, you all know this story. You teach it to your children. Jesus cast these demons out of these 2 men, or the one man, and they go into this herd of pigs. Now, first of all, a respectable Jew wouldn't have got close to a herd of pigs. You remember the story of the prodigal son? I mean, he was a nobleman's son. But after he'd gone and squandered all of his living, all of this wealth, what did he have to do to survive? Well, when all else failed, he went and served as a servant, the lowest servant of a nobleman who was not a Jew and who raised swine or pigs. And the prodigal son had sunk so low in life that he was feeding the pigs and longed to be able to eat what the pigs were eating. So I think when you see any relationship that puts a Jew or Jesus in connection with swine or pigs, it's showing you the very bottom. These demons were so aware of who Jesus was that they pleaded with him to send them into the swine that the Jews would not touch so that they might survive. And so, of course, Jesus does. He allows them to go in the swine, and then you know the story. The pigs run down to the sea, to the water, and they drown themselves. So those tending the pigs ran off and went to the town and reported all this, including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. Then the whole town went out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region. I mean, of course, first of all, these people, probably the vast majority of them, were not Jewish. What is Jesus doing there anyway? Well, it's just like with the Samaritan. He went to Samaria, where no respectable Jew would have gone. And he met the Samaritan woman, and he spent 2 days with the Samaritan people. Jesus has now gone to this region in the Gadarenes, and he doesn't seek out the synagogue right away. He goes to the tombs and the places where these demons are. He could have avoided them. He could have avoided these demon-possessed men, but he didn't. And he cast the demons out. This so scares the people. And of course, the pigs was pretty big to those people. I mean, it was like having sheep and goats if you were Jewish. This was swine. This is how they made their living. And all these pigs had committed suicide and drowned. And the people were so afraid of the power of Jesus and what he might do next that they begged him to leave. Everybody. But there's a significant number of people who come from the town and did that. Now, just because I think this is such an interesting story, before we put Jesus back on the boat and he goes back to the other side, let's go and look at Luke chapter 8. I think that's our next best reading on this. It's recorded both in Luke and in Mark. I think Mark is just a really abbreviated message, and I think it is in Luke 8 that we'll have our best story. Again, I want to point, why am I picking out certain stories? Well, some of them is because they just fall in the order where we are. And I can't get all of them in the next 5 weeks because that's how long I've got to finish up counting today. And they're only giving me 10 minutes already this morning. But I like this story because it shows how Jesus, he went places that most people wouldn't go. And he addressed people that most people wouldn't speak to. And he cared about people that most Jewish, good, righteous, everyday people would avoid, like they had leprosy. Oh, well, some of them did have leprosy. They would avoid them like they were demon-possessed. Well, some of them were demon-possessed. As I told you, there was times that Delane and I thought our child might possibly be demon-possessed. All right. We are now in Luke chapter 8. And you kind of got that summary statement up at the top that says, and we're in Luke chapter 8, verse 1. After this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. And then he begins to name some of those women who had demons and who had diseases, and he healed them. And the first one, of course, he names is this Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, she's just another well-respected woman. I don't know if she had a demon. I don't know if she had a disease, but she's mentioned among those who Jesus has healed. And she now follows him. You notice how this keeps happening, that people follow? We have seen people called to follow, and we've seen people who have surrendered to follow. And here are some women that I don't know if Jesus particularly said to Mary and to Joanna, follow me, but they have chosen to follow him. And it's people who Jesus has affected their life. All right, so we're still in Luke chapter 8. Verse 3, it says, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. That's a significant role that this woman and her husband have. Susanna and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. Not only did these women follow, but they're helping to support. What did Jesus tell the guy? I have no place to lay my head. Well, these women helped provide him a place to lay his head and to help to feed him and his disciples wherever he went. Verse 4. Jesus tells the parable of the four soils. Now, I want to skip past that. I think the part that I wanted to get to here, unless I've got the wrong reference. Okay, moving on into Luke chapter 4, we have Jesus tells the parable of the soils, then he explains it, then he describes who his family is. This is another little interlude comes where his family come, he's teaching, he's preaching in the synagogues, and they think he's out of his mind, and they come they want to do an intervention. And we'll find that recorded in a couple places, but we're only going to mention this morning. And so he tells and explains who his true family is. It's not just those who he is biologically related to and shares DNA with, but it is all those who come to him. Now, Jesus, we have the story in verse 22 of Luke where he calms the storm. That started off in the same way. One day, Jesus said to his disciples, let's go to the other side of the lake. So they got into a boat and set out. And as they sailed, he fell asleep. And then a squall came down on the lake, and the boat was being swamped, this one tells us, and they were in great danger. They didn't just imagine the danger. The boat was being swamped. You understand? All right, so we won't read on through that, but that just gives you an idea of some of the difference of the story. Then we come to they've made it safe successfully. He's calmed the raging storm. They've made it to the shoreline, and here's the story of the demon-possessed men again. So beginning in verse 20, Luke chapter 8, verse 20, they sailed to the region of the Gadarenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. So they're over in the area of the Decapolis. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house. So this guy stood out among the two demon-possessed men. In Luke's telling this story, and whoever Luke got the story from, this man stood out. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus? Son of the Most High God, I beg you, don't torture me." So this man who is possessed is being spoken through by the demon. The demon is speaking through him. Don't torture me. For Jesus had commanded the evil spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. So a little different rendering of the story, but it's the same story. Jesus asked him, speaking to the demon within the man, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him, and they begged him repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. Now, you know what the abyss is. When you know for sure what he means there, you can explain it to me. But what I've seen from an abyss is a place that's deep and it's void of oxygen. The abyss that I'm aware of is either way out in space or way below the surface of the water. So somewhere Jesus was sending this place called the abyss, and this demon or legion of demons did not want to go. A large herd of pigs were feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into them, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man. Now, see, this really fills in and fleshes out the story that we read, just as more of a summary statement of it a while ago. And the people went out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet. This is a wild man. This is a demon-possessed man. He's now apparently clothed and sitting at the feet of Jesus, calmly. They found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gadarenes asked Jesus to leave them, because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and he left. Now I don't think that's quite the end of the story. But so Jesus has just made this trip across and goes to one area of the Gadarenes, heals these two demon-possessed men. The people come out and request him to leave, and he goes back to Capernaum. It's kind of like the trip to Samaria. He went out of his way, or he went out of the normal Jew's way to go into Samaria, to that mountain, so that he could sit down at the well and talk to the Samaritan woman. Jesus left all of these people who are coming to him to be healed of diseases and demon possession, and who are requesting to follow him, and crossed the sea through a storm and calmed it, just to get to this shoreline to heal these two demon-possessed men. And then he's going to go back home. Does he care about people? I mean, do you see Jesus painting a picture for you and I? How he just takes time for people? Most of us would have avoided the demon-possessed people. All right, that's our last bell, so let's wrap this up. So the people of the region of the Gadarenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. It's not just the pigs, it's what he's done with the demon-possessed man. That kind of power frightened them. Then here's the next statement. So he got into his boat and he left. But the man from whom, I'm in verse 38 now, I believe it is. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him. What has Jesus done? He has said, follow me. Wherever he went, he told the news of the kingdom, and he has put out a message that says, follow me. And what does this man do? How does he respond? He says to Jesus, he begs. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, return home and tell how much God has done for you. So the man went away, and he told all over the town how much Jesus had done for him. See, Jesus called some of these men to be fishermen, to be evangelists, and he's going to send them out. But there's a significant number of us that Jesus says, you go home and tell everybody in your family and your circle what God's done for you. What God has done for you. See, some of us, our mission is foreign lands. And some of us, our mission is to go to the most difficult inner cities. And some of us, God just says, as you go, you share me. You go home, and as you go, you share me. As you go to those inner cities and those difficult places, you share me. As you go to the foreign countries and the foreign lands, you share me with those who you come in contact with. And you show the compassion and the caring that I show for those who are suffering. We'll stop there this morning. I just love that story. I mean, if you see that depicted in the movie, that man, they can do something with that. And as I told you earlier, when the guy in the Green Mile, when he healed somebody, when he took on their disease, you could see the visual effects of the disease coming out of them and him inhaling it, basically. And when he had healed the leper, you would have seen the leprosy on his arms. With Jesus, I'm not sure if we got to see all that, but somehow people saw the effects of it. They saw the swine go down to the sea, and pigs didn't normally commit suicide. So this morning, we'll close with that story of how Jesus cared enough that he crossed the sea just to heal 2 men. The lesson is yours.
I've got 3 or 4 yards for you today. Ain't not too happy. I tried to tell him, hey, yeah,
I was looking around.
that way. A lot of times scrappy pull right up out of the ground.
Yeah, but we'll pay you $40 to get it done.
Okay.
I've just been mowing yards since I was 6 years old.
So I just may have to push everybody to Wednesday and get the guy that works with me come over. It's supposed to bring us in Tuesday.
You got to shut down.
No, not yet.
When he's starting to get tired of me getting all this lawn equipment. I bought my first brand new